All right. Well, we're going to get started. I'm François Gay, the founder of Canadian Cybersecurity Network. Thank you so much for attending. We've also got the LinkedIn live stream and YouTube stream. I'm excited today to welcome two great speakers, Bill Olson from AWS Canada and Brad Lisowski from Zscaler. And they're going to talk about, AI workloads and zero trust, some great things. So much in the news currently. I'm going to hand it out to both of these gentlemen. But first, I just want to say we've got two great webinars coming up in the next month. We've got both Paris, that's going to be doing a great discussion, and Security Scorecard that we're planning currently as well. So welcome to the show. Bill and Brad, have fun.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And welcome and thank you everybody for joining this Canadian Cybersecurity Network webinar. As you can see on the screen, today's session is safeguarding generative AI workloads with zero trust, some best practices and techniques. So Brad and I are going to be your hosts. We've got some material, this is what's up on the screen, to help provide some context and get the conversation started. But please do feel free to submit your questions through the chat. We'll have some time at the end to go through those questions, and we'll do our best to get through any of those that were submitted. So Brad, why don't we start with introductions? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bill. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon, depending where you are. It might still be good morning where you are. And my name is Brad Lisowski. I'm a principal sales engineer with Zscaler. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 25 years now, and I've just coming up on 7 years with Zscaler, where I've been a majors SE as well as spent some time on the product management team. And I'll be talking about more so the user and workload view of zero trust today, how that would traverse across the Zscaler Zero Trust Exchange across our 160 data centers where we process traffic for over 45 million users. And of course, we'll be talking about how you can use that in conjunction with Bill and our friends at AWS. So Bill, if you want to do some introductions on your side.
Sure, thanks. So obviously my name is Bill Olson. I'm a security advisor here at AWS. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. In my role, I get to work with our public sector customers. So that's the various levels of government, education, healthcare, nonprofit. And I get to help them with their security strategy, their challenges, and questions, particularly around adopting the cloud. And if you haven't heard, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, it's the world's most comprehensive, broadly adopted cloud. So we offer, I think, north of 200 fully featured services at this point through data centers across the globe. So we've got millions of customers, including over 7,500 government agencies, I think it's a number now. They all use AWS for to meet various business requirements, lower costs, become more agile, innovate faster, all that fun stuff. So today, we thought we'd start with some foundational items. Namely, let's start with what is zero trust? And so even before zero trust, we felt there's an underlying question there. And that's, what are the optimal patterns that you're looking to ensure the right levels of security and availability for your systems and data? Super practical. We use this question to help make forward progress here. And generally, AWS has avoided zero trust for a period of time. Some fear that there's, just playing to buzzwords, that kind of thing. But eventually, there's enough questions and demand overlapping between the AWS perspective and zero trust that we wanted to clarify how we see it. And so this is our definition of zero trust, which is a conceptual security model associated with a set of mechanisms that focus on providing security controls around digital assets that do not solely or fundamentally depend on traditional networks or network perimeters. So it aims for simplicity over completeness. And so the general idea here is that with zero trust, you're not going to rely only on the network perimeter. Instead, we're going to bring a wealth of additional sources of context, things like identity, devices, in order to make more granular and frequent decisions about who can access what. And so before we move on, I do want to highlight those intentional words that we use, the security model. So we really believe zero trust. It's a way of thinking about security. It's the how, not the what. And we'll touch on that as we go through our talk today. And so to help with that definition, we have a couple of guiding principles that we thought would be helpful to share. So the first one is to just avoid a binary choice. It's frequently cited that the perimeter is dead. We don't wholly believe that. So on one hand, you have identity-centric or extremely granular choice. This might be authenticate each and every request. On the other hand, you have a network-centric. This is familiar, easy to reason about. You just filter unnecessary noise out of the system. And we think the best security doesn't come from a choice between identity-centric or network-centric. We think the best security comes from making this and whenever possible. So use your network perimeters. They can provide guardrails within which identity-centric can operate. So optimally or ideally, they coexist. So they're aware of each other and they augment each other. So the second principle, and this might be the more important one, is just the focus on use cases. So zero trust can mean different things in different contexts. And this is one of the reasons why you often hear people very confused, or it sounds ambiguous what people mean by zero trust. So the idea is share the underlying principles so that you can identify the best case, so get down to your choices. So the goals might range from end user mobility, so eliminating unneeded lateral movement. And to me, that absolute key of having productive zero trust conversation is focusing on that problem that you're trying to solve, work backwards from that. So figuring out how best to do it, and then remember that first guiding principle, not a binary choice. There's some flexibility in how you approach this whole concept. So continue with that thought, we want to apply it in accordance with the value of the systems being protected. So it's not inflexible mandates, you must do this kind of things. The value of the system and the data being protected is going to vary. So if it's not very sensitive, you may not need to go to the same lengths. So over the time, application of zero trust, conceptual model and associated mechanisms will continue to improve defense in depth and continue to make security controls we already have work better through that increased visibility and software-defined nature of the cloud. So, and kind of getting through that, one of the things I often hear being at AWS is we have a lot of pieces to various puzzles. Identity and access management being one of them. I want to approach zero trust. How do I do that? And a lot of those Lego pieces involve some element of assembly, and that's great for some organizations, others not so much. And this is often where partners like a Zscaler come into play on our side of things. Brad, did you want to dive in a little further?
Yeah. So let's talk about, Bill, you were talking about, making sure users can connect to things, but you want to make sure that, you've got from a zero trust perspective. So, realistically, when we think about it from a user, a workload, all those things, the internet is really now your new transport network, right? The perimeter is gone, and you use the internet for transport, because we've all gone to a coffee shop or, working from home or something like that, where, we still want to access the things that we need to access, but really, can you be trusted? And that's kind of where we start off with zero trust. So the first thing we do when we think about zero trust at Zscaler, and we talk to our customers about it, is, who are you? What is your identity? And Bill, you touched on this a little bit as well, but you have to make sure we validate identity. You have to make sure you use things like MFA or strong credentials to make sure that, Brad is actually Brad. But the important part here is that everyone is untrusted, right? Just because I've done my authentication or something like that, I'm still untrusted in a zero trust framework. And then we step up one level, and the next question is, where are we going, right? Where do I need to get to? And we start to think about applying policy there, because if, for example, I'm not part of a certain part of my organization, like if I'm part of the finance team, why do I need to access, like back-end HR resources, right? I shouldn't need to do that in my day-to-day job. So being able to apply those policies and connecting users to applications that they need to have access to and nothing more. That's kind of the next step up in this ladder. We never want to connect a user to the network, because when you connect a user to the network, you start to violate that whole zero trust principle. The next step up the ladder is we're looking at risk. And so I could be Brad, I could be allowed to go somewhere, but what is my risk posture or my risk policy for my users? We look at a number of different things, including user, device, the content you're going to. We bring in third-party information, but also other things like, where am I coming from, right? Brad should never be in a certain country or anything like that. So we take a number of those things, and as long as the other two things have checked out, we now have the risk that as long as I'm in an acceptable risk profile, I'm allowed to continue up this ladder to finally say, what should I do? And there's a lot of things that you can do besides allow and block, right? That's the old school things that you can do, very binary, yes or no. But maybe it's I'm going to isolate you. Maybe you didn't pass that risk score. Everything else checked out all right, but I'm going to put you into an isolation session. Or I think you're an attacker. I'm going to deceive you into thinking that you're able to do this. So when you're working with zero trust up this ladder, there's a number of different things that are at administrators' fingertips to be able to do. And doing this not only to your internet and SaaS properties, but also to your private data center, and of course, what you have hosted in AWS. All of those things you can apply zero trust policies to, because you're connecting users to where they need to go, or a workload to where it needs to go, and nothing more. Next slide, please, Bill.
Yep.
And when we look at this, we have two opposing architectures, right? If you have a legacy firewall environment where you have to be on the network, that's kind of, opposite to what zero trust should be, right? If you think about it in the context of your house, right? Your house is basically a legacy network. Once you're in the front door, unless you have ways to, divide off your home and enforce those policies, you're basically, if I walk into Bill's house and I want to go to the kitchen and help myself to a snack and then go see how big his TV is in the basement, I'm able to do that. But when we take that out of the equation, those firewalls, and we never put the user on the network, and move to a zero trust environment where you're connecting through an exchange, you're connecting a user to the application, or the other connections that we talked about. The app is the destination. You've got the context, and everything else is dark. So going back to my example of invading Bill's house to get a snack, Bill could say, Brad's not allowed to go to my kitchen or into my basement. He's allowed to go into the front room, and that's it. And that's, how we look at being able to connect users, to only allow them to where they need to go. And that's only possible when you take users off the network and you run them through some kind of exchange. Next slide, please, Bill.
Cool. Yeah. Did you want to touch on some common use cases?
Yeah. So when we look at, use cases, a lot of these use cases are going to be very familiar to the folks on the webinar today. But, when you're migrating users to the cloud, whether that be, I'm going to have sort of dovetail two into each other, the mergers and acquisitions into migration to cloud, you want to be able to say, I'm only going to allow these users access to things they need, right? We mentioned about that in the previous conversation, but being able to say, I've just acquired this company and they only need access to certain assets, but they're not quite ready to be, given the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. That's really where zero trust can come into play. Of course, secure remote access, bringing your users back into your environment for access to the applications that they need, but more importantly, workload security. We're all very familiar with getting users to applications, but getting cloud workload to cloud workload, that's the next kind of step where organizations who have segmented their users in the applications that they access, that's the next step into your zero trust journey, right? Is getting access to make sure that, server A can only connect to servers 1, 2, and 3, maybe in another data center or something like that. And that way, if there's ever a compromise, the blast radius is significantly smaller. And then finally, data protection. And data protection is going to dovetail into our Gen AI conversation that's coming up. But we also want to make sure that with this new world of generative AI and all the different services that are out there, we want to make sure that the users are connecting to only the services that are permitted by my business policy, but also are using them appropriately based on, the information that is being sent to those services. So with that, Bill, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yep.
So when we're looking at this, on the right-hand side, we have our AWS environment, and in the middle we have our Zero Trust Exchange. And when no matter where your stuff is hosted within AWS, you can put in different resources to make sure that those resources run through a service such as Zscaler, where you're able to connect back to, in our case, the Zscaler Private Access Cloud. And that's really what facilitates a server talking to another server, a user talking to a system, or any of those different things, no matter where a user is. And this really does integrate seamlessly in with AWS. And AWS is a great partner of ours, and we basically made sure that all of our stuff can work seamlessly with AWS, connecting your users to applications, but also that server to server piece. Next slide.
So we do also have generative AI in the title today, so we do want to dovetail to that. And so we've got the backdrop of zero trust, how zero trust architecture can work in some common use cases. So question often comes up, what, if anything, do I need to consider when I'm playing with Gen AI? And so in the conversations I have, I like to introduce this security scoping matrix primarily because it's the intent is to provide a mental model to help organizations assess and implement relevant security controls based on what they're doing with AI. And so the scope represents a number of different potential workloads, some from over-the-shelf consumer apps, like in a scope 1, you may just have users going directly to ChatGPT or Amazon Party Rock, that kind of thing, all the way to scope 5, where maybe you have the resources to actually, develop your own large language model. And the idea with the scoping matrix is to help answer some of those common questions that come up so that you can focus a little bit more on, all right, this is what we're trying to do. What do I need to focus on security-wise? Do I need to change my approach to security? What are the intersections of Gen AI and security? What are some of the mechanisms I can use to understand what the risk, security, compliance requirements are? As well as what are some examples of how security requirements change depending on these scopes? And so the matrix includes some common guidance, but also helps you what to prioritize based on the scope that you land in. So, for example, with that kind of off-the-shelf scope 1, you may pay more attention to terms of service and licensing and data sovereignty. Where in the kind of 3, 4, 5, where you're more of the builder, your data can be used in the training and fine-tuning. So you may want to pay more attention to the data classification, data type of the assets that solution that you're building is going to have access to. So Brad, you did a good job with examples before. Do you want to talk through a few more?
Sure. So if we can just go back one slide to your scoping matrix, because I think it's really important to delineate the use of the scopes here. So when you're talking, Bill, you're more focusing on a little bit on 1 and 2, but 3, 4, and 5.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 and 2 are probably what a lot of the viewers on the webinar are thinking most about, because every organization is now starting to consume both consumer and enterprise app Gen AI. So if you can go down to the next slide, please. So when you're starting to use your Gen AI tools for your chat GPTs and all these kind of things, one of the things that we have to be cognizant about is when you put any information, a question, or you ask ChatGPT to go out and understand something and provide you back a summary, they're taking that and they're adding it to their model. They're using that to train their model. A large public business, or sorry, user-to-user business site just revealed that they're opting their users into AI usage for their posts and that kind of thing. So something just to think about, that you always have to make sure, number one, you understand the security policies behind things and how your data is being used. And that takes it to some of the examples on the left-hand side, which is, here's a snippet of my internal source code of something I'm working on. Could you optimize that for me, ChatGPT, or place your favorite LLM here? or I'm using a service that I think is part of my organization through a third-party SaaS, and you're asking it parts about your business or things like that. Make my acquisition notes into a press release or something, and you're putting that into that large language model, that LLM, and now that information is essentially potentially being leaked out to the public. And so it's, as it shows, like, tell me about Acme. Well, I know a lot about Acme, and that's because we've fed it inadvertently information about our organization or things that we're doing. So you go to the next slide.
Yep.
Thanks. So when you start to put some data protection in between those, and you want to inspect the traffic that's going out of your organization for like I said, that source code or things that are marked as confidential. And you want to have the capabilities to stop that before it really starts to hit those services, so that when when someone comes and says, tell me about Acme, they only know what's on Wikipedia or what they can glean from public news sources. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Bill. And context and contextual visibility is important, because when if you are only using if you think you're only using ChatGPT and you have or something from one of the, like, another vendor that does AI, and you've purchased a enterprise license, and that's the only thing that users are allowed to go and use, they may still be finding ways around those. So being able to get any kind of information about the prompts that they're using, or information that way, or any information that's being leaked out, that's really critical for organizations to think about, when they start using the zero trust framework, and they start adapting that to data loss prevention and Gen AI. Next slide. And we could even use this with Amazon Q, which goes out and goes out to the internet and crawls to find information online. You can run that through a service like Zscaler, and then as you start to dump that information into an S3 bucket, we can then start to scan that to make sure that, number one, there's no malicious content in there, and there's data that's appropriate versus data that may not be appropriate, that your organization did not want to go and let out or find. Next slide, please.
Yep. I think those are great examples. Kind of even simplifying some of that data flow that Brad was describing. One of the elements I find most helpful from that scoping matrix is this kind of generic data flow of what typically happens with a generative AI application. The app gets input from the user, formats that user input, customer data into the prompt. The prompt's processed by a model. The completion is processed by the app, and then response is sent to the user. And this is kind of gives you a starting point for, okay, what are we working with? So if I'm in the scope one, it's a good chance I don't really have much control over any of this. So I'm going to be focusing probably more on user training. Where if your organization is more involved in refining third-party generative AI foundation model by fine-tuning some of the data, that'd be more of a scope 4, and you have shifted from being a buyer to a builder. So now you're the owner of that generative AI application, and your risk management strategy is going to have to shift to evaluate the different risks. So using that legend, those green colors mean those areas are now more in your control as compared to scope 1, where they weren't. So you have to start considering some of the security ramifications. What are the kind of threats you need to worry about, and what can you do? How are you can control access to that fine-tuned model? How are you going to restrict access to the fine-tuned model given its data classification? So how much do you have to restrict it? And then even broader things like model theft. That involves unauthorized access. So if someone has access, copies, exfiltrates that information, you lose a lot of your time, energy, and knowledge. So with that, I think we've set some context for the discussion. So hopefully we're going to switch over to questions, see what's been submitted. We'll do our best to answer those. Before I do that, I do want to highlight there's some resources available for what we have been talking about, what we've referenced, as well as we want to keep this conversation going. So if anyone is available in the Ottawa area next week around the 9th, we do have the Ottawa Symposium going on. The Zscaler is going to be there. I'll be there. I think CCN might even be there. So feel free to hit us up and continue the conversation. But with that, let me see if I can get over to the questions here.
There's a couple of hands up.
Yeah.
Maybe if the people who have put their hand up can put a question into chat, we can address that.
Yeah. If I can find my cursor. This makes it feel like a real meeting. I can't control the screen here. There we go. All right. So there's one question. Can you please talk about zero trust data versus zero trust architecture?
So,
yeah.
So to the participant that put that in, if you could expand a little bit on zero trust data. I mean, when we're talking about zero trust architecture, I mean, if you think about how everybody's zero trust these days, but there is not one, if someone comes to you and says, I'm going to give you zero trust across the board, that, you're not going to get that. You're going to have to go with, different vendors for different things to get the different pieces of zero trust into your environment, whether that be, from an access piece or, going in, we're talking about the Gen AI models and that kind of things. So when we say I'm Bill, do you have any ideas or thoughts on zero trust data or?
Well, I was going to go back to is kind of those definitions that we presented early on, particularly how it's we see zero trust as a security model. So it's a way of thinking about security. It's not necessarily the how, it's just the what. So with the zero trust data, zero trust architecture, my guess is that it's kind of how do I protect this data and what architecture should I use?
Yeah. So there's a clarification in the chat around from the participant that asked the question that a company called XQ sells zero trust data encrypted at the packet level. I don't know a whole lot about XQ. I want to be careful about how zero trust is kind of one of the heavily used new buzzwords. So, I mean, if you think about it, TLS is almost encrypted at the packet level. So, not quite sure what that organization is doing, but thanks for letting me know. That's something I'm going to go and check out to see if I can find out a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and then I mean, not to I mean, I am going to reuse some of the stuff that we presented earlier. I mean, I think where there's confusion, I always rely on the working backwards. So what are we trying to solve and what do we need to get there? So kind of going back to the not binary choice, understand your use case. I think that really helps. So if that, whatever they're offering solves that business challenge, fantastic. Otherwise, just use that process to clarify what's going on.
Yeah. Always go back to what problem are you solving?
Yeah. So another question here. What are the high risk areas in using Gen AI other than data protection? What kind of questions do you get on that front, Brad?
So I get a lot of data protection questions. That's kind of that's the arena that I play in, because the last thing that we want is for corporate data, corporate secrets, et cetera, to be populated into Gen AI. I have talked to some of my colleagues and some of my customers about some of the challenges they've had around just getting general source code that actually works and knowing what's there. But also, some of the hallucinations are quite interesting. And when you think one of the hallucinations are real, that's something else. But Bill, do you ever find that some of the large language models that that are used are being poisoned in somehow, by data that is crawled on the internet or something like that?
Yeah, it's a danger. I mean, I think that's where for me, it's still fascinating. Like, I feel like we've been talking about Gen AI for a long time, but that's just because of the company I'm at. I think it's still very new for a lot of people. And it's very interesting to understand the nuance behind the threats as well as the different use cases. So like you say, like data poisoning is a threat. Like if you just sign up, use a generic model, you have no idea what that model has been trained on for sure. And any information you put in there, you're now the training data. So some of the alternative architectures are starting to become more understood, as well as, certainly from my perspective, interesting, whether that's RAG, some other fine-tuning approach, so that you have some control over your data, and you're just leveraging that foundational model for what it has been trained on, not retraining it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of the other areas of challenge with Gen AI, pardon me, is some of the services have a lot looser guardrails for the types of data that they will, or the types of output they will produce given some of the prompts. I'm pretty sure a lot of people can start to think about, without any additional prompting from me, what some of those challenges might be with deep fakes and things like that. Um, that's something that is I don't know if we have a good solution for yet as an industry, other than relying on the makers of these services to use the appropriate guardrails. But if the internet has taught us anything, there's a lot of good people out there, but there's also a lot of bad actors out there.
Yeah. Well, what I do like about the zero trust model approach, in that you do have to break down, like the ladder you were showing, who are you, why do you need this, what do you have access to, that kind of thing. It helps. I feel like early on in my career, I was in far too many conversations where our business development team, where I need access to X, people that can provision access don't understand how to provision that access. So it's kind of, I want something, you need to tell me how or where that is. The zero trust is trying to answer that question. So break it down so everyone starts to understand a little bit more about what are our data, or what are our assets, what kind of value do they have? Are they sensitive? Are they not? Who needs access? How do we do that? So that make it that much more granular. So it's not, hey, someone said I need access to X. Brad has similar access. Give me everything that Brad has.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we got even more questions in here. We should probably go back to these. Do you think the general market C-suite understands zero trust or Gen AI in Canada, or are we still in the education mode? Has our competency improved? My pronunciation has not, but
That's an interesting question. A lot of the customers that I deal with have, I don't, they have gone and purchased a corporate instance to place your favorite Gen AI here. Potentially, they view that as the easiest path forward, the safest path forward. I think from my perspective, and Bill, I'd love you to weigh in on this. It's still such new technology, and we're still figuring out how that organizations can wrap guardrails, our own guardrails, around this technology and allow it's so powerful, and it's so phenomenal what you can do with it. Like, I can't code to save my life, but within about 10 minutes and ChatGPT, I had a Python script doing all the things I needed it to do, and that would have taken me so much longer to figure that out myself. But that's just a very simple example. I know there's a lot of other things that people do with it. um, so long-winded way to say it's so very new, and we're doing our best with the tools that we have. But I think this is going to be a very explosive space to see the types of tools that come out, not only from a chat GPT and similar, but also the controls you can wrap around it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, to the question itself, yeah, I don't think it's super well understood. Certainly as you move further away from security and technical teams. I mean, if we are all kind of still redefining it, what does it mean? Even the earlier question of this product does it, it's ambiguous. So I think what comes to mind when I hear questions like that is just the general responsibility of whoever's running the security program in a given organization to find a method to be able to communicate what needs to be done, how it's being done, and the plan to fill those gaps, that it kind of speaks to all levels, up to senior levels, board of directors, but that same information can be detailed out to the actual teams involved. So kind of if you've got a framework, or you're, by choice or regulated, here's a list of things that we're doing. However you measure, keep tabs against how you're going to be doing those things, break that down so people can see why they're doing it, where you are, what needs to happen. And zero trust might be one of those things sprinkled in there. We need to improve our access control around these various things. Like, to Brad's point, some of this technology is getting incredibly powerful. I saw a good analogy the other day. It's, even with the cloud things, training is important. Like, it makes a lot of these services that even, AWS provides super easy. Like, like your example, I can spin up a Jupyter notebook. All of a sudden I'm walking through this notebook and I've created an application. I got Gen AI chatbot going everywhere. It's kind of like, they don't let you fly a 747 just because you have a driver's license. There's got to be something in between to make sure that you're doing the right things. And that security team, that plan, those guardrails, that's where the burden of, all right, we got to make sure that there's something in between here.
There's a question in the chat on on scope 4 of your diagram. I'm going to have to defer to you on that one.
Sure. PEP. If whoever asks it can just clarify what a PEP is. Oh, that might help me, but stand between the user and the app. Would that say micro-segmentation having between the green box policy enforcement point? Potentially, yeah, that'd be one method to control. I mean, again, you're gonna, when I think of those generic flows, especially from that scoping matrix and the different scopes, it helps narrow down where I can apply some control, but I'd probably lean on resources like the OAuth top 10 for LLMs for some of the, what do I need to worry about? Maybe the MITRE ATT&CK Atlas framework. That'll give you some tactics and techniques for, all right, I'm worried about this. How do those things happen? So I have a better idea of how to prevent those. So that might be one point of a control to mitigate certain threat. It all kind of comes down to your threat model. Speaking of which, I'm a big proponent of threat models to help that conversation we were just talking about. It'd be amazing if everyone did threat modeling, but at least at the very minimum, I like it as that conversation catalyst of development, security, whomever else is talking about what are we building? What are we worried about? What are we doing about it? How are we testing it? It's not going to be perfect first time through, but at least you start building that understanding, that communication, as well as that deck of resources. So should something go sideways, whoever's helping respond to that incident has something to refer to. What is this thing? How does it work? Where are the weak points? What were we trying to do? There was a follow-on question to that understanding at the C-suite, our budget's being appropriately allocated. I would think that, again, goes to that burden of communicating that security program. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we're doing. Here are the gaps. That should tee up the conversation of what are the priorities and what kind of resources are needed. Is it money, people, all the above kind of thing? So that kind of, the burden's on each organization, not on that side, but generally speaking, probably not. If it's not clear, they probably aren't clear on what to spend. And then Brad, if you had any thoughts on that one.
All I know is that a lot of my customers found money immediately to get a corporate instance of an LLM. So there's money there,
Yeah.
but whether or not that's being spent appropriately is the other question.
Well, that's a good point though, because Gen AI, it's exciting. It might be scary for security teams that already feel like maybe they're behind the ball, but it's also, I've seen organizations use this opportunity to improve their security. So maybe they're already doing some of the right things and they just need to do more of it. But others were, hey, we still need to do these right things. This is making it more, there's more of an imperative to do these right things. You really want that exciting new technology, we're going to need some help. And again, hopefully you've got a good story to present that. Here, we got a big gap here. We need some help here so that we can facilitate organization take advantage of this powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, I don't see any other questions. So
yeah,
to the attendees who are on, now it's kind of your last shot to throw a question in if you still have one.
Exactly. Otherwise, I'll plug the Ottawa Symposium again next week. So please come see us. We can chat there. Happy to say hi, answer any questions.
I unfortunately won't be there, but some of my colleagues will. So, they would love to continue this conversation on zero trust and Gen AI. So
cool. Well, Brad, thank you. This was fun.
Likewise, Bill. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.